Hello, and welcome to Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we will continue our reading of Wake. Our protagonist, Charlie Horse, has just entangled himself with an animated knife and gotten away with the help of the house brownie Trella. That was just a few seconds ago. They had just restored order when they heard the door open downstairs. "Hello, Charles!" It was Lily. "Hey, Charlie Horse!" called Alex, humor in his voice. "Upstairs," he bellowed. "Bedroom!" His sister and cousin continued talking as they worked their way up. "We got tired of listening to everybody talk about Aunt Bet," said Lily. "Very depressing." "Boring, too," said Alex. "What have you been doing here?" "Yes, there are all these little tingles of magic now. We thought you must be bored all alone here, and—" They reached the bedroom door and found Charlie Horse parked out, typing on his phone. Trella sitting sideways on his back as on a bench. "We ain't been bored," said Trella. "And I wasn't alone," said Charlie, "but thank you for coming. It's been very interesting." He told them about the knife. Cautiously, they approached the table and looked. "Say friend, say foe," Alex translated. "And like an idiot, I said foe," said Charlie Horse. "Would you like a demonstration? I think it's safe." "Okay," said Lily, taking 2 big steps back from the table. "Goth," said Charlie. The knife stood and buzzed. "Melon," said Lily. The knife fell. "Quick and simple," she said through a tight mouth. "But the spell itself must be quite complex to come up with fight moves and to know who to attack and who to defend. Or maybe just who not to attack. It didn't have anyone to defend." "A subject for further research," said Charlie. "But it fits with other things we've found." "What have you found?" Lily asked. "Let me give you the tour. I don't care much about staying in this room." He ducked his head and started out the door. Trella jumped off and then wasn't to be seen. He was starting to get used to it. He wondered if she had dodged in and out of the day with Aunt Bet, too. He did not remember seeing her at all during his rare visits. Out in the hall, he backed toward the stairs and called out to them, "See the landscape paintings? It's hard to see in the daylight, but if you put them in your shadow, which I grant is easier for me, you see they shine. The paintings are of daylight scenes, and they hold the light levels. Must make nice night lights. And they're on the upper floor, away from unsundered visitors." "If she ever had any," Alex remarked, studying a view of sunlit Heather Hills. "I wonder what Lanton and the sexton made of that knife." "It would have been off while they were here," Lily said. "Yeah, but what's a little old lady doing with a whacking great knife by her bed?" Charlie shrugged. "They'd suppose it was for security. That's what I supposed, even before I triggered it." He pointed at the next door down. "Take a look in there." Once they were in there, Charlie entered as far as his horse shoulders. "Look at these paintings." The room was a study with a roll-up desk and 2 large bookcases. The walls were crowded with paintings, and the air tingled with magic. "3D!" exclaimed Alex. Coming through the door, you came face to face with a white-wigged gentleman of the 18th century. The texture of his skin and clothes was composed of brushstrokes, but he appeared solid, round. "I'm glad he's not more realistic," said Lily. "He'd be like a waxwork. I hate those." "There's more," said Charlie Horse. "Every painting in here is either 3D or self-illuminating. There's a little landscape over there with trees blowing in the wind." Alex examined a 3D still life of silverware and fruit on a table. "This stuff must be worth a lot," he remarked. "I mean, take original art, a lot of it antique, then multiply by 5 or 10 because of the enchantment." "There was a big fashion for this 3D stuff around 1900, Lily remarked. "Sundered collectors still want it. The biggest collection is in the Skryte Museum in Prague. This might be the second biggest." There's more, said Charlie Horse. He took another step in, leaned over, and lifted the cover of the roll-top desk. The last few years this got used for storage, not office work, I think. It's full of receipts and notes and letters. Something very important might be among them, but I'll let the air sort them, whoever that turns out to be. I did note this, and this. He pulled out a mirror, oval, 6 inches high, with a short handle. Next he pulled out a music box, a squat cylinder of brush-finished metal on elegant gilded curly legs. He pulled a knob, and a toy gazebo came up. A waltz tinkled, and inside the gazebo a pair of tiny figures turned, thumbnail high, delicately enameled. The music box has no way to wind it, Charlie pointed out. It just goes. Forever. As long as someone with a scrap of vis is nearby, I suppose. Now look in the mirror. Alex picked it up and looked, then passed it to Lily. She looked too. Seems normal, but I feel the charm. Now look at me in it. Lily obeyed and stood with her back to Charlie, looking in the mirror. She then pulled in a breath and held it. She motioned Alex to come to her side. They saw a horse, big and brown, standing in the doorway. Now flip it over and do it again. The horse's mouth moved in the mirror. They obeyed again, looked again, and saw Charles, but not Charlie Horse. A tall, burly man in red jacket and blue trousers, standing in the doorway, bipedal in the conventional manner. That's interesting, Alex said. Isn't it? Said Charlie Horse. Trella had to show me how it worked. She reflects as a fox, or a little woman, or a brown and white jackdaw. I wonder what exactly it's reflecting, said Lily. Another topic for further research, said Charlie. And there's this. He opened the center drawer and drew out a flat box of dark wood. Before I open it, he told his relatives, I want you two to scope out the charm. He laid it on the desk. Alex picked the box up, brushed his fingers over it, then cocked his head, considering. Not hugely powerful. Old, lifetimes. Aggressive, attacking. Not a trap, I think, but a weapon. Human-made. The guy enjoyed making it. I don't think I'd like him. Or her? Asked Lily, taking it from him. He shrugged. She looked at or through it. There's more than one spell here. 7. I don't get time and race data like you do, cuz, or the mood stuff. But yes, out to harm. 7 different ways. But weapons, not traps. Unless the caster is too tricky for me. Anyway, I suppose you already looked. The start of each spell is the same, but the ending is different. Like, you pull the trigger on any gun, but what comes out could be a bullet or a laser or... Did you say they had dust guns on Hod? Sand guns, yes, and they show up on Gavura too. And Yasad does steam guns. Okay, very informative. Take a look. Lily opened the box. Alex looked over her shoulder. Huh, he said. It'd look like dinnerware if it weren't all knives. It was all knives. 7 nearly identical knives with slender blades and ivory handles, long enough to carve steaks, though no one thought that was their purpose. More Sindarin, said Lily. Each blade bore Tengwar calligraphy. Not going to pronounce any of it, Charlie Horse assured them. They may be what made me a touch blasé about the one in the bedroom, but read. I don't think there's any invocations, said Lily, but read silently before translating strength, wit, speed, skill, sleep, vis, luck. I suspect, said Charlie Horse, that on top of normal damage, each knife damages the virtue it names. The strength knife weakens you, and so on. Or do you think it transfers the virtue to the holder? With awful insouciance, Lily picked up the strength knife and examined it, holding the blade far too close to her eyes for Charlie's comfort. Therefore she did not see her huge brother tense and hold exactly still. I don't think so, she said after a few seconds. It's tricky, but not that tricky, I don't believe. Alex picked up the wit knife. Charlie briefly shut his eyes and fired off a prayer. He only knew the damned things were enchanted. He had to trust their superior perception to catch any additional dangers. Yeah, there's hate here, or a pleasure in aggression, but no rapacity, no greed. He put it back and Lily followed suit. Charlie resumed breathing. Futlin things. Someone just decided to get fancy with a bleeding knife, Lily said dismissively. Where did you hear about bleeding knives? Her big brother demanded. She grinned. The Barfield Academy for Sundered Young Ladies has a variegated clientele and faculty. Okay, I'll play straight man, said Alex. What's a bleeding knife? Lily looked at Charlie, who made an after you gesture. They make the wound bleed extra is all. Alex nodded. Anything else? He asked, looking around the study. Not that I detected, said Charlie, other than some preservative spells, I suppose, like the one Lily noticed this morning. There are a lot of those. He backed out the door and continued backing down the hall. Come down to the kitchen. We collected some interesting stuff down there. He then backed down the stairs, somewhat like a man coming down a ladder. That always looks so odd, Alex remarked. But it's easier, answered Charlie Horse. The weight's on the back legs. He led them into the kitchen, where a number of objects lay on the central table, and Trella sat on a counter. Trella wants to make sure you don't miss this, Charlie said, holding up one find. It was a figure on a base, about 8 inches high. Base and figure were both of wrought iron, and there was a plain spike planted in the middle of the base. The figure bore a knife as a sword and was poised, it seemed, to attack the spike. Its painted face wore long upturned mustaches, a dab of goatee, and a maniacal grin. Is he a soldier or a clown? Asked Lily. The figure wore a tall, brimless, cylindrical hat, a short vest, baggy pants, and boots with tiny spurs painted on the heels. Hat and vest were orange, undershirt white, pants purple, and all festooned with brilliant green braiding. A soldier, Charlie answered. A zouave. The word rhymed with suave. That's a style of light infantry, famous for their gaudy dress uniforms. He smiled lopsided and swept his free hand down his crimson jacket and back to the deep blue saddlecloth. Uncle Mark may think this unsuitable for a funeral, but it could have been worse. Trella chuckled. Only used it 4 or 5 times, but I kept it up there, she pointed to a shelf, for show. It's an apple peeler, Charlie explained. He put it down on the table. On cue, Trella popped an apple on it and turned a crank. The zouave brought his sword to bear on the apple. After one turn, he changed angles with a click and peeled another band off. After a few such turns, he clicked back into arms ready, and the apple was peeled, save for a few flecks. Cute, said Alex. Lily nodded. But not magical. Nor is it, agreed Charlie. But I don't think it's of our Earth either. I think it's from Hod. The clockwork is so good, and it just looks Hodian to me. In any case, it illustrates the theme we've been discovering. The cutty-cutty, stabby-stabby thing, said Alice. You know, I wasn't over here a lot as a kid, but I was some, and I don't recall anything like this. Me either, said Lily, and Charlie said, nor me. Maybe she hid her interest, knowing it would raise eyebrows. Think of all the things she could hide here by herself. His eyes strayed over the rest of the table. Maybe it was growing, suggested Lily, and wasn't there when we were kids, or was slight. She also studied the other objects, 2 flat wooden boxes, a dark plank of wood, and a stack of small silver-gray books. She didn't have to be alone, grumbled Alex. I remember the folks were always inviting her over. Come over for Christmas, come over for this birthday, this kid's getting confirmed. But she hardly ever came. If she did, she left soon, kinda too soon for politeness. We gave up. I'm trying not to be too judgy about the knives, Charlie Horse said. After all, I carry a cavalry saber and a canteen knife every day when I'm in the field. You're a soldier, Alex countered. Well, I was trying, Charlie continued, but then I found this stuff, and that nasty little surprise upstairs. He shoved one of the flat boxes across the table with his fingertips. Taking the hint, Alex flipped it open with one finger. Another knife and little glass jars. The knife was strapped to the inside of the box, broad-bladed, with a leather-wrapped handle. A row of tiny glass jars sat in roughly worked niches under another strap. It all looked sturdy and practical and not at all like Aunt Bet's usual refined style. "I know this one is from Out Zone," said Charlie. "In the military, we just call them Gavura knives. Of course, Gavura is a whole world with many cultures, but these knives happen to come from the culture near our base at Gavura Set. So Captain Fletcher included them in a useful lecture on things to watch out for on Gavura. See the grooves near the edge? You rub in the poison of your choice as a paste, wearing gloves, I should think. Hence the little glass jars. Cobra venom, crate venom, black widow venom, box jelly venom, imported from Out Zone, very expensive, and a local anesthetic to mix with others so the target doesn't feel the cut. No magic to it, but can you tell if it's been used recently?" He shoved the box toward Alex. Alex, to Charlie's relief, did not venture to pick the knife up. He picked up the whole box and held it for a while. "So far, I'm best at the history of enchanted things," he cautioned. "But yeah, this has been used. Not at all recently. Not anciently either." "Well," inconclusive. "Here's the last one." And Charlie Horse pushed across the other box, thinner, darker, polished. Alex flipped it open. Knives, what a surprise. On red velvet lay two thin, curved knives crossing each other. Magic here for sure. He tilted his head and seemed to listen. "Meta-magic," said Lily. "Magic about magic. Something here for juggling power." "Wow," Alex said softly. "These stink of adrenaline, stress, trauma, and willpower, resolution, buckets of it." He looked up and met Charlie's eyes. "Austerity knives." Charlie nodded. "Thought so. If you're sure, I'm sure. I get a whiff of the feeling, too, and I recognize the style. Give yourself a few good cuts, they can be shallow ones, and jack your supply of vis way up. Look carefully at the blades, where they join the handles." Alex and Lily each picked one up and looked, not seeming to hear Charlie repeat "carefully" in a tense mutter. "Blood," said Lily. "Tiny remnants of blood stains. Something black and grainy, anyway." "Do you really think," Charlie said, "I can't help thinking that if they were just for display, they'd be thoroughly cleaned." Alex glanced out the kitchen window to the new grave. "I suppose she might have scars on her arms or something." "We are not digging her up," Lily asserted. "Moving quickly on," said Charlie Horse. "Guess what this is?" He presented them with the plank of wood. It was about 2 feet long and 10 inches wide. Carved in intaglio was the figure of a smiling man in an almost cartoon-like style, wearing a wide-brimmed hat with plume and the poofy sleeves and trousers of the 17th century. Alex moved to touch it and withdrew before making contact, puzzled. Lily did touch it, did not withdraw, and said, "It's a bit greasy." Alex reached out again, did touch this time, and said, "Warm. It's supposed to be warm or hot. But it isn't. There's—" "A mold," said Lily triumphantly. "A big cookie mold." "Right," Trella confirmed. "Gingerbread men, big ones. We had it hanging on the wall over there for decoration." Her face clouded. "But we won't now. I won't." "What's the matter?" asked Lily. "There was a button ward on it," said Charlie, "on the back, held on with a bit of putty. When it came off, we both felt something. What do you two think it is?" They brooded over it for a couple of minutes, then gave up. It's a very slight enchantment, said Lily, and it's on something slight. It's faint, dim. It's old. It's sad, said Alex, and stopped. Charlie Horse sighed. It's haunted, a bit. He sighed again. We're all ghost sensitive, but I think I have more acquaintance with ghosts than you two. I've worked with astral projectors and ghost hunters, and I researched it when Aunt Lou died. Did she ever? Began Lily. No, don't worry. Hauntings were rarely happy things. But you know me, I couldn't help thinking about it, so I studied it. I think this is the least kind of ghost. Not an unhoused soul, not an astral image, not even an energy residue, just a hole in the world where someone used to be. It's really the commonest kind of ghost, but the hardest to notice, and they don't last long. The world moves on, he said, his voice going a little hard. The bit of magic here is holding the hole open. Whose hole? Lily asked, or wondered. Well, the obvious candidate is Uncle Dieter, said Alex. But he's been signing papers, objected Lily. He might be alive, probably is. But all anyone ever sees are the signed papers, countered Alex. But these are important papers, said Lily. Big checks and contracts and such. There'll be forgery tests. Maybe that's what she keeps the ghost for. Lily looked at Charlie Horse. Can a ghost like this, that's just a hole, sign papers? Charlie shrugged. By itself, no. With a lot of magical help, well, what is not possible? Lily waved her hand dismissively. But Aunt Bet didn't have that kind of skill. She had all these enchanted things, but no significant skill, no more than us. She rounded on Alex preemptively. And don't say she was hiding it. Skill like that would take years, decades to develop. She wasn't a recluse long enough to hide that. Alex nodded quickly. Is this necromancy? He asked Charlie Horse, nodding at the haunted cookie mold. Legally, I'd rather not have a witch in the family, even if she's dead now. Charlie Horse furrowed his brows. I'm not sure. Kenotic ghosts, as they're called, or shuetu, or gap ghosts, are not really ghosts at all, or so some argue. After all, there's no soul involved. It's at least dabbling, Lily declared. Well, yes, Charlie admitted, but we don't know that Aunt Bet cast the spell. Still, she was good at making use of magical instruments. He looked at the gingerbread mold and mused. One might make a gingerbread man and eat it. That might give one a temporary copy of the deceased's memories, or skills, like handwriting. Lily and Alex both made disgusted faces, but Trella said, She didn't. All she did for cooking was toast bread, and I'd know if she'd been doing any cooking on the sly. Well, did you ever see Dieter about in any form? Charlie asked. Not since he scarpered. Lily took a deep breath. There's this girl at Barfield. Her family were sundered just a few years ago, so she didn't grow up with it. She sometimes says, I feel like I've stepped into a fairy tale. Now I feel like I've stepped into a mystery novel. Are we seriously considering that Aunt Bet might have murdered her husband and used his ghost to forge papers? No one said anything. In particular, no one said, of course not. The truth is, said Charlie Horse, we didn't know her very well. Not even my mother. And we knew her less and less in recent years. Well, here are the books. He shoved the ghostly cookie mold aside and replaced it with a stack of books. They were small and thick with silver gray covers, but no titles except for a year written on the front of each. They're diaries or journals. She must have bought them all in a batch. They're organized by the calendar, each with 366 pages, but no days of the week marked, so you can use them in any year. You've been reading her diaries? Asked Lily dubiously. Charlie Horse gave her a short glare. Lily, we were just wondering if she was a witch or a murderer. Post-mortem privacy fades next to that. Anyway, maybe you'll find something to exonerate her. I will? All of you, the family. You can go through it at your leisure. But it ought to go fairly fast from the bit I skimmed. Most pages are like this. He held out a book opened at random. The left page read, Tuesday, overcast, 22 degrees. Alex picked up a book. Yeah, let's find something more interesting. A little riffling produced, Friday, snow, -3 degrees. Packages from EBR JKOP. Checks to ELHH. Come on, you can do better than that, Aunt Bet, Alex said. Charlie, Lily, and Trella all picked up books and riffled. Charlie Horse picked out the volume for 2017 and started through. Soon enough, he found what he was looking for. Saturday, raw and windy, 5 degrees. Some bills. Evelyn burst in wailing about her Charles, signed up with dedicated cavalry, going on about horse monsters, told her nothing to be done, put it behind her. And so she did, he murmured. He was about to show the entry to Lily and Alex when Trella chuckled triumphantly. Look at this, she said, and held out a book. Wednesday, warm and fair, 24 degrees, had Dieter out for papers. And she snuck him in when I was out. Look at the date. It's a cross-quarter day. I always take them and quarter days off along with Sundays and soul cake days. Charlie nodded. Had him out, he wondered. You know, Alex jibed. Unpacked him, dusted him off. But took him out to lunch, surely, Lily said. More selective checks of quarter days and cross-quarter days garnered more repetitions of had Dieter out, varied with had Dieter over, sometimes without amplification, usually to sign things or for papers. So the scarpering was very incomplete, Alex noted. I wonder when was the last time, said Lily. It could be a clue, and he is the heir. Of all these knives, Alex muttered. There's one of those books on her bedside, Trella said. You could check. And they'll check next time.